Hello and welcome back to the Tyre Recycling Podcast. We're here today with episode 35. As usual, I'm Richard Wilson, your host, and I'm joined by Ewan Scott, the editor of Tyre Rubber Recycling. Hi there, Ewan. We just published our podcast with Sejanus last time out. Could you tell us what you have in store for today's episode?
Hi, Richard. Well, today we're talking to Fredrik Ardefors from SDAB, the Swedish EPR agency. And the SDAB is possibly the first of the EPR agencies that was established. And it also ran a contract system with essentially a monopoly collecting the tyres. And a couple of years back, pre-COVID, I visited Fredrik Ardefors in Sweden, and they still had their original scheme in place. Their sole contractor for Tyre Recycling was Ragn-Sells, who are quite prominent in the Baltic states, Scandinavian states. And he intimated at the time that SDAB wasn't happy with the material recycling. And what we'll find out today in this podcast is a little bit about how SDAB is moving the goalposts and taking on the tyre recycling as they will become the tyre recycling agency. They will take ownership of the tyres. So there are a lot of opportunities coming up in Sweden, and possibly, as we will find out in the interview, possibly in the wider Scandinavian market, tyre recyclers.
Fantastic. Well, so we have another interview in the EPR scheme. Last time out with Sejanus on the other side of the world. This time out a bit more closer to home, to where we are in Europe and Northern Europe. So let's get stuck into that interview with SDAB.
Fredrik Ardefors, you're the CEO of SDAB in Sweden. So you're responsible for tyre collection, or the tyre management in Sweden. Yeah?
That's correct, yes.
Okay. Now the last time we spoke, I do recall you mentioning that you weren't entirely pleased with the way tyre recycling was being managed in Sweden, because you essentially subcontracted the business to Ragn-Sells, and they were, whilst they were collecting the tyres, they weren't necessarily recycling them. And looking at the figures for Sweden, I can see that, Romania aside, Sweden is the only country in Europe where more tyres go to energy recovery than go to material recycling. Now, I understand this is something that you want to change. Can you explain what process you're going to go through?
Yes, I think maybe first just to remind ourselves that the Swedish EPR scheme was actually the first one in the world from 1994. And at those days, no one had any experience on how to run an operation with tyre recycling or collection and recycling. And it was decided to use this single source structure with an open tender every 5 years, and for the collection, the processing, and the offset of the material. And that's the way the operation's been running. And what we actually could see was that from the beginning, it was more a matter of not having tires out in the forest, but to collect them in a structured way, and not so much focus on what to do with the material really, but rather to make sure that the tires didn't end up in the wrong place. Over time, as we've seen, the ambitions worldwide have grown. So now it's more a matter of actually using the material or the energy in the tires for good purposes, to offload the outtake of natural resources from our planet. And looking at the trends, as you were mentioning, we saw that unfortunately it was a negative spiral where the export of tire material for energy recovery in cement industry was increasing and the material recycling was coming down. So we started to look into how is it happening, what is going on worldwide, how are markets moving, what is the status of technology like pyrolysis, devulcanization, molded products from granulate, etc. And we kept in dialogue with the contractor, but also with other parties. And we realized that to be able to have, to channel our resources and to make priorities, not on a 5-year basis, but maybe half-year or 1-year basis, we needed to get more control ourselves. So this was the starting point, really, to look at a new structure. So we brought in a team, myself and 2 more, and we worked for 2 years to prepare, to make a full analysis from regulations to, as I said, markets, offset opportunities, technology status, etc. And we came up with this idea to actually get more involved ourselves in the coordination of activities, and that's what we're planning for now.
Okay. Now, I read from your report that you will become responsible for the marketing of the end product. That's quite a challenge, I would imagine.
In a way, yes, but this is maybe something that's a little bit different from the schemes out internationally, because we saw that if you look at what I call low refined recycled material, shreds or fine shreds, that is more or less a commodity in the world market. And that's where you have a competition and you can source it. Of course, it's a matter of transport costs, so you don't compete with Portugal from Sweden because you have the high cost of transport. But nevertheless, we decided not to have a national competition really for trade in shreds, but actually to own the material and to control the material. But then when we put it further in the value chain into granulation, into pyrolysis, devulcanization, etc., that's where the competition should work and the market forces should be in place. So yes, we have control, we own the material from collection through shredding, fine shredding, but from that point we offset it to further process. And actually, when we started to look into the offset opportunities, we have some 90,000 tons total of ELT tires arising every year. Today, we have discussions for 138,000 tons. So it was a lot easier to find offset than we thought. And this is interesting because it means that we can actually start up with a fairly secure offset, and we can move from energy to material recycling one step at a time with batches of, say, 10, 20,000 ton units. So this is the way that we are changing over time, moving volumes over to more material recycling.
Okay. So looking at the figures that you have in your report, granulate has dropped quite considerably over the years to, I think, 161,000 tons, or 100. That can't be. It must have 161 tons. Is that all?
Yeah, actually, what happened was in late 2019, our contractor Ragn-Sells decided to close down the granulation facility in Sweden. And this was due to market reasons and the financial situation. They had, to be frank, a better deal selling shreds to cement industry in Morocco and Turkey. So even though we have an ambition and had ambitions in our contract, we could not force them to run at a loss. So they made this decision to stop granulation. And of course, this is a little bit weird, because if you look at the big actors today, if you look at Genan and you look at Granuband and others, they have quite good sell-offs, and they even export to America because there is a demand for granulate. But the market works as if you want to contract with the cement industry, for example, not through brokers, but the direct contract, which is usually financially beneficial, you need to write a 4 or 5 year contract. So it's not easy to swap back to granulation production when you've promised the volume to a cement industry in Turkey. So that's where we are, and this is one of the reasons that we want to change and to break up this 5-year monopoly situation, and to be able to move volumes every year if we want to. Of course, we need to respect that any investment in bigger facilities, for example, pyrolysis, they need a write-off period of 5, 6, 7, or even 10 years. So we need to give them a contract. But then it's not for the full volume of 90,000 tons. It's maybe 10 or 20,000 tons. So that's what's happened, and what you can see in the figures. The close down of the granulation facility in Sweden and started exporting to Turkey and Morocco.
That's interesting, because it's an example of how the draw of the export market, the easy access of the export market, can undermine the development of added value recycling in any market. Certainly, I mean, we have an issue in the UK where we're shipping vast volumes of tyres mostly to India still, and we have companies like Wastefront, Orfits, and 1 or 2 others looking for funding to develop large volume pyrolysis plants, and the investors are saying, well, where's your feedstock? They can't guarantee the feedstock because it's been exported. It's the chicken and egg case, and from the view of a recycler, why should I invest? Why should I run at a loss? To produce granulate when there's a guy in India willing to take 100,000 tons of tyres a year. So that's an aside. I see that you are developing a brand new tyre recycling facility. Is it Linköping?
Yes, and just to comment on the issue of running a loss and how to actually stimulate invention development and new applications. I think this is one of the key issues where you have some international setups in ELT organizations as stewardships, and the stewardships are working with subsidies quite a lot. You can see it in some places in Canada, in California, you have it in Australia, etc. It's always difficult not to end up in a long-term subsidized market. And if you look at the international trends, and India stating now that they want to reduce the imports of ELTs from Europe. Remember, we have in Europe 3.5 million tons arisings per year, and export to Asia is about 1.3 million tons. So if that would half, we would have 650,000 tons more in Europe to handle. And at the same time, you have a cement industry that is saying that they want to go biofuel, not using fossil, not using tires, or even becoming electric. So we need to find ways, and this means that if you leave it to short-term recyclers to decide, they cannot take the investment, and their horizon is really the next 6 months or 12 months. So what we've built into our system is really to be able to support new businesses short-term, but not long-term. So we can give a starting support, for example, in rubber cement or in molded products, where we give a good deal on using our material for the first 2 or 3 years. Then it's coming down and normalizes to normal market pricing. And what we're doing in Linköping is we've divided the country into several regions. The biggest one, which stands for about 40-45% of the total risings in Sweden, we looked at the map and saw where is the optimal place from logistics to have a facility, came up with Linköping. And we have a subcontractor who's been involved with Ragn-Sells for 20 odd years in the recycling, so they know what they're doing. We made a deal with them, so they make the investments at site. We don't take the investments ourselves. Actually, they are leasing the equipment. So it's not in the books of anyone, but we guarantee the lease. So both they have a multi-year contract, which caters for the cash flow. And should anything happen with the subcontractor, we guarantee that we take over the lease from the bank. And this ensures that they are engaged in the operations, in optimizing, in looking after the equipment, maintenance, make sure that you don't get wrong things into the shredders to damage them, etc. But this will be a facility for shreds and fine shreds at 42,000 tons per year. And we also have a special granulate line for 10,000 tons. And this is what I call single malt granulate. That is, I think you understand what I mean.
Yeah.
You can actually bring out just Nordic winter tires or just truck treads, and you can put it into this very specific short special granulate line. And this means that we can feed a very, very specific material to customers in molding products. We can get the correct mixture for pyrolysis of granulate, for example. And we can use, if you look at artificial turf infills, you would prefer in the Nordic conditions, Nordic winter tires, because the rubber is softer, which would be beneficial even in the football pitch, same as on the road. So this special granulate single malt process is a bit unique, but it's for 10,000 tons only. So we're not competing with the big granulators, and they have a different market niche because they mix the standard mixture of incoming tires all the time. But this is also to enable startups where the big granulators are stuck in long-term delivery contracts. So they cannot offer 3,000 tons to an entrepreneur who's coming up with an idea and wants to try, for example, rubber concrete. But we can run a small batch for them to get them going and then long-term off in the market.
I guess it's more difficult for a larger operator to specify in such detail that they're going to use this type of truck tire or a winter tire alone. I have heard of the idea some pyrolysis plants in particular taking single brand tires.
Yes.
Which, if you're Michelin and you're in control of your tire feedstock, then yeah, I can see that working. But if you're an independent pyrolysis operator dealing with the general tire market, it's not quite so easy to say we're only going to take Continental or Michelin or winter tires. But you have control of that in Sweden. You can do that.
Yes, and what we do now is not from 1st of January when we're actually launching the organization 2023, but maybe a year or two later, we will have automatic sorting where we can also separate the different brands and summer and winter and studded tires. And also we can measure the tread depth. The remaining tread depth is crucial on passenger car tires if you want to optimize the silica content in the granulate. Because if you have a lot of remaining tread depth, you have a lot of silica, because that's where you have the silica rubber.
Yeah.
So if we want to minimize silica, then we should have really worn out tires that are close to the legal limit. So you see, I envisage that we are getting more and more into different materials. It's not just a crumb, rubber, whatever mixture. We actually pick out and we use the properties of that specific material to the application. And then we don't know yet when, but we can foresee that the big manufacturers want to get some of their tires back also in their own circular loop. And not at least if you look at the airless tires coming in 2024. We suspect that 3D printing and other things will put pressure on us to be able to feed back those tires.
Okay. Now, one other question. We recently interviewed Videotech, who are using Tyre-derived aggregate in drainage systems and in foundation stabilizing projects, particularly in northern Sweden, where the ground is subject to temperature extremes. Is that something that you would see as a future market for Tyre-derived aggregate in Sweden?
Absolutely, yes. And I think there are different perspectives here. Of course, you have the tire manufacturers as producers, as having the legal producer responsibility, and you need to match in their sustainability goals, etc. And then you have the ELT organizations running EPR schemes, and we try to optimize the, let's say, the total footprint or the environmental footprint within certain financial limits. So in my shareholder agreement, it's actually stated that we should increase the material recycling as much as possible, but we should also increase the value of the recycled material so that in very long term, we may reduce or even take away the eco fees. So, and to achieve that, I think we need to bet on many different horses, and this is one. And I think in our white paper, we also outlined some of the parameters on how to evaluate, is it a good application or is it not a good application? And one of those parameters is really, is it possible to recycle once again after the application? So yes, absolutely, it's interesting, and we need to look into it more, and we're happy to keep those discussions going. I can mention also that if you look at the total market, you have volume segments and you also have niche segments. And one niche segment that is coming up now is 3D printing. So we have a company in Sweden using tire material mixed with plastics and a copolymer that puts them together. And you can put it into a 3D printer. And so we have furniture now in the office printed with tire material, and that's not a volume market, but you raise the value of the material, and it shows the opportunity using the material, and also it gives an idea for ordinary everyday people that this is a good material that has a place in society. After being a tire, it comes back to everyday life.
Yeah, I mean, one of the arguments that I have heard from potential recyclers in other markets is that where there's an EPR scheme in place, the agency wants to move tires, wants to move large volumes of tires. So when they go to, I'm not going to name the agencies, but when they go to the agency and say, can we have 3,000 tons of tires so that we can produce this low volume product, the agencies look at it and they say, well, it's not in our interest to supply you with just 3,000 tons. If you want to take 20,000 tons, then we can talk. So, in a way, the drive to move large volumes of tires restricts access to the market. Oh, and we see a lot of European funded projects over the years that never really seem to come to reality, partly because the tire they can't get people to invest, they can't get people to supply feedstock. So your facility, where you can have a low volume offtake, might well encourage newcomers to the business and new experimental projects to try and find new markets. It's interesting.
I think so, and we are also open to cooperate with other countries. I mean, this setup to actually have control over collection and the basic recycling process to shreds, where the commodity is, and then to create volumes or to let's say make it possible for entrepreneurs to secure a volume that could be done over the borders as well. So I think the model could be expanded to other countries if we want to, and we are happy to share any new applications that we come up with. As I said, the 3D printing or the rubber concrete. The rubber concrete is actually a spin-off from horse racing and horse jumping, where it's really important to have a stiff and soft ground for the horses to land on. And it should drain water and it shouldn't be too dry, etc., etc. And they started to mixture with cement and rubber, and they came up with a concept that works. And now they're building tracks in all over Northern Europe, and it's growing very, very fast. And they even done some walls in stables, etc., of this material, because it weighs about 40% of ordinary concrete. So this is today a local market, but it should be copied in other countries with their own tire input. We shouldn't be exporting rubber concrete from Sweden. We should export the concept. So yes, and I see that's coming quite a lot as well, and especially in smaller countries, actually.
Now, you've mentioned exporting the idea.
Yeah.
It strikes me that your next door neighbours in Norway operate a similar system to your current system, where you have Rag & Cells as the main contractor.
That's
I can't ask
correct.
you to speak about them, but
No, actually, you can, since early summer, I'm on the legal board of the Norwegian EPR scheme as well. So the ambition there is also to look into what does the future look like, and should they continue on their own, or should it be some sort of coordination within Sweden, Norway, or even the whole Nordic market. We will see. I don't know, but at least we have a very good dialogue, and also Per Christian Nauster, who is the CEO in Norway, is now on the Swedish board. So we have this cross-fertilizing concept, and I think that's something that will come all over Europe as well, because the worst scenario would be really that we compete. Of course, we should be very careful about the competition regulations, of course. But the worst scenario would be that we compete on low refined shreds, and we subsidize, for example, the cement industry by providing them fuel and money to take our material. And we underbid each other. And I can tell you, because we have a very strong balance sheet, I will probably win over some other countries in buying my way into the door of the cement industry, but I don't want to do it. I want to spend the money on future concepts instead. So, but that would be the worst case scenario, that we end up subsidizing other industries rather than developing our own.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that. When I visited several recyclers in Germany, they all complained about a decline in the cement industry. Cement industry wasn't taking as many tires from them. But then, when we dug a little deeper, we discovered that Alipur, Nipurnews in particular, were essentially buying the market, because they have the higher gate fees. Fees, whereas the Germans are operating in a free market, and what they can get for the tires is dependent on the market. So they could not match the gate fees that Alipur and Nipurnews were prepared to pay. So whilst Alipur and Nipurnews were saying, yeah, look, we're recycling all these tires, at the same time they were creating issues in Germany. So the international competition in selling tire-derived fuel in Europe, with agencies competing with each other, isn't a good thing.
It's funny, because at the same time, it's the same tire manufacturers behind the national EPR schemes. So we should be able to cooperate in some way, always, of course, in respect for the competition regulations. But this is something that is really coming, and with India, Asia not taking the same volumes in the future, we will have more pressure on this. So this is also one of the strategic decisions that we took. We need to be ahead of that game, not to end up in this underbidding scenario.
Absolutely. I mean, I think a lot of people gave a sigh of relief when the Indian government backed off on the ban on the import of tires. But I'm sure that in due course that will happen. And if Europe in particular doesn't, and I include the UK in Europe, if we don't address our own recycling issues now, in 10 years' time, we're going to have a serious problem.
Yes, that's absolutely true. I think if you look at the tire recycling from our own perspective, I don't think cement industry is bad. I think it's good. And I mean, they need fuel and they need the steel. Possibly, they could have also new tires with self-sealing components, because they're so difficult to shred. And there are parts of the cement industry that actually can take whole tires. So that could be a good solution there. We have a contract now in Sweden for that. But then also, if we use our material in different applications, what do you do with it afterwards? Maybe then it's good to put it back to cement industry. So we have sort of a link in between, but we actually take out the most of the material before it goes to energy recovery.
Yeah, I remember from your white paper the hierarchy that you established.
Yes.
Envisions where pyrolysis and tar derived fuel were at the bottom of the chain.
Yeah, we call it exit applications. Not necessarily for the whole volume, but for some of the volume. And this might sound as a contradiction because pyrolysis as well, I think, will be more niched. If you niche for carbon black or oils and you are supposed to use the carbon black into passenger car tires or truck tires or big tires, you have a slightly different fine-tuning of the process. And that might be more difficult if you feed in second-hand tire recycled material.
Yeah.
So it's a balance, of course, and in every case you need to look at the details to see what's the best option. That's really important.
Okay, listen, we are coming to the end of our time, so it's been really good speaking to you again, and it's been great to hear how SDAB is in a way taking a lead in looking at a new way of recycling. So thank you very much for your time, Fredrik.
Thank you, my pleasure, and thanks for having me on, and we keep in touch.
Yeah, I'm sure we'll speak again.
So there you have it. There was our interview with the Swedish EPR scheme. Ewan, you alluded to some bit in the intro to this podcast. You alluded to some of the potential findings and things you were going to discuss in that interview. So what were the main highlights of that discussion for you?
Well, the main highlight, the main outcome here is that as from the 1st of January, SDAB will physically be responsible for the tires. They are taking on that responsibility. They will no longer be subcontracting solely to Ragn-Sells. They're going to increase the material recycling capacity, and they're actually building their own Tyre Recycling facility at a place called Linköping, where they will. It just so happens to be next door to a waste to energy plant, but they intend developing the market for recycled materials, and obviously Scandinavian Enviros is going to be a major client. We also spoke recently to Vidotech about tire derived aggregate being used in foundations. That's another market for them. And one of the points that Fredrik made, which I thought was quite apposite, was that the EPR agencies should not be competing with each other. And I think we allude to it in the discussion that Germany, which is a free market, at the moment has no EPR agency, finds itself competing with the EPR agencies in France and Italy, who are able to pay a higher gate fee to dispose of tires at German cement kilns. And Fredrik quite rightly says that we shouldn't be doing that. What he wants to see happen is as much as possible of the tire recycling being done in country, with an increase in proportion of it being material recovery rather than energy recovery. So that's a change of tack from SDAB's original policy of having that single contract, that sole contract with Ragn-Sells, and let Ragn-Sells deal with the issue. Ragn-Sells was a waste management company, and their key plan, their key strategy was to simply dispose of waste, not recycle it. So although they did recycle some tires, the bulk of them were either exported or went to waste to energy plants, which is not what SDAB want to see happen. The other interesting thing is they have taken on a director from the Norwegian EPR scheme, and the Norwegian EPR scheme has taken on directors from SDAB in Sweden. So it is likely that this change in strategy in Sweden may well follow on and be taken up in Norway as well, because Norway also operates the original system, the single contractor being Ragn-Sells. So Ragn-Sells are in for a hard time in Scandinavia because they're going to be losing the Tyre contracts. So it was an interesting meeting, an interesting discussion, and it's good to see SDAB, as always, being at the forefront of change.
Absolutely. Obviously, moving away from what we have just seen in today's episode, could you just give a brief promo for our next podcast episode that we have coming up?
Right, our next one, we're back to pyrolysis with Krzysztof Grabowski from Contek in Poland. Krzysztof has been quite vocal and is becoming increasingly vocal about his business and how he wants to see it develop. And we will see that his aims for the company are to grow the company through using their own technology rather than licensing it, which is a bit of a change from what happens with some of the other companies. But we'll learn more about that in the next podcast.
Brilliant. Okay, thanks for that promo, Ewan. Thanks for organising the interview with SDAB today, and we'll be back very shortly with another episode of the Tyre Recycling Podcast. Until then, stay safe.